This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's the place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome aboard, folks. Dr. Charles Parker here one more time for Core Brain Journal, and we are really privileged to have as a guest a fellow that I've known for years. I have a great deal of admiration and respect for. Dr. Ned Hallowell has actually been the thought leader that really opened the door for ADHD nationally. You can't say anything less than that because he is the guy that did it with Driven to Distraction many years ago. And then what happens is he's been very active in the ADHD recovering community for a long period of time. And he has a new book, and we're going to be talking about it in just a second. Ned, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So we're going to have a quick word from the sponsor, and then we're going to talk about this really interesting book about Ned and guess what? His family. He's going to get right down and personal with us. And I'm looking forward to his conversation because I haven't heard about it. And I have not had, he asked me a moment ago if I've read the book. I haven't had a chance to read it. I'm just too darn busy, unfortunately. I regret that I haven't, but I will read it. So let's tell you about our sponsors. Core Brain Journal is supported by Great Plains Laboratory. They are deep international biomedical testing leaders for improved targeted mind science details. As both laboratory and, get this, webinar global thought leaders, they provide the most comprehensive set of hard data measurement tools for real biomedical answers beyond the commonplace guesswork that we see every day. They also provide multiple training webinars for both the public and interested medical providers on how to use that important data effectively in their offices globally, my friends. Check out their website for references and testing details, and take note of this offer that they're putting out for our Core Brain Journal listeners. If you go over there to the site that I'm going to tell you about in just a second, you can register for a Great Plains Laboratory complimentary test drawing each week. And those are organic acid tests. We frequently talk about IgG, immunoglobulin G. We know that immunity is such a big deal with treatment failure. So go over there and drop your name over at Great Plains Laboratory. That's plural, greatplainslaboratory.com/CBJ for Core Brain Journal. Easy to remember. So let's talk a little bit about Dr. Hallowell. Ned Hallowell is a child and adult psychiatrist, as many of you know. He's a leading authority in the field of ADHD. He's a New York Times bestselling author, a world-renowned speaker, and the host of Distraction, a weekly podcast for managing this crazy busy world that we live in. He is the founder of the Hallowell Centers in Boston MetroWest, New York City, San Francisco, and Seattle. And as I was saying a moment ago, you know, this is really a privilege for all of us here. It's a privilege for me personally, but I know it's a privilege for you to listen to a guy that has made such a significant difference in the lives of so many people. I've heard Ned present many times at ADHD conferences. And the theme that you're going to hear from him today, that I know he's going to be talking about because I did read some of the blurbs on his book, is his compassion and his sensitivity to his warm understanding of people with problems. And to me, after you hear what he's going to tell us about, you can say, how could he possibly arrive at those conclusions? Because he had a very difficult run with it. So let's just start with, first of all, the bigger picture, if we can, Ned. What prompted you to say, I'm going to talk about myself on a personal level? I mean, nobody does this. I'm going to talk about my family. Goodness knows.
The honest answer is my wife said I should do it. So
that's a good, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's helpful.
I said, I don't want to talk about myself. She said, well, it's not you, it's your story. And once I could understand that it wasn't sort of being talking about me, it was my story. And the difference is, and she had a good point, that what I lived through and what I did, it's good for other people to hear about it because sort of says, this is something that other people can do as well. And it was also a chance for me to try to dispel some of the stigma that surrounds mental illness in general. I mean, I think it's one of the places that reform has yet to hit. We've really tried to attack racism, and we've really tried to attack sexism, and the whole mental health ism. We really haven't attacked, and it remains a deep, dark dungeon of ignorance and stigma and just a whole lot of misinformation. And there's no field of medicine where the consumption of the science lags further behind than the science than in mental health. We know so much more than people avail themselves of simply because of stigma, simply because they don't want to be associated with crazy people. So by my writing a book about my crazy family, I thought maybe that would strike a bit of a blow. And so I wrote this book because I come from a crazy family.
That is amazing.
I do come from a crazy family. That's the title of the book. And I thought that would be a way of, and it's not a woeful story at all. It's a lot of very funny stories. It's not a woe is me or anything like that. I'm very proud of my crazy family. There were a lot of brilliant, eccentric characters, and some of them were downright crazy and hospitalized for it. Others should have been, but weren't. Mm-hmm. I had some tough times, but I don't look back with anything but affection. And it is true, my dad was hospitalized for bipolar disorder, and as a result, my mom divorced him, and then she remarried a guy who turned out to be an abusive alcoholic. He's the closest thing to a bad guy in the story, but even he had his reasons, and I don't look at him with hatred at all. I look at him with understanding, and so then my mom became alcoholic along with him, and so I got sent away to a boarding school when I was 10 years old, which is unusual in this country. In England, that's sort of standard, but in this country, it's not. So there I was being basically raised in an institution, in a boarding school, and with a psychotic father and alcoholic mother, abusive stepfather, and two so-called learning disabilities that I didn't know about, ADHD and dyslexia. And people with those kinds of risk factors end up usually not doing very well. One of the unanswered questions the book leaves the reader to wonder is, how is it that I then went on to Harvard College and medical school and was on the Harvard Medical School faculty. And now I've written 21 books and have 3 wonderful children and 30 years of marriage and 68 years old. And I'm happy. It's the studies show that people with these risk factors, there's actually a study, the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, that if you have 4 of the 10 risk factors they identify, the chances of your leading any kind of a adult life are pretty much nil. Well, I have 8 of those risk factors. So I've way beat the odds. And how does that happen? And part of the point of the memoir is, let's wonder together how this happens. And then the second half of the book is stories from my early training before I learned about ADD. My early training at a state hospital, Mass Mental Health Center, that was also a Harvard teaching hospital, and the heroism and the dignity and the comedy of those very crazy patients whom I loved and who taught me so much. And that's the second half of the book, what I learned from them, what they taught me. And it's so it's a compendium of craziness in the most wonderful sense of that word.
Well, it's so interesting because the fact that you would use as a means of introducing the book to go to the vernacular of the word crazy, which is so, as you started to say a moment ago, and I'm sorry I interrupted you, I almost, was hitting it, because a lot of people, when somebody used the word crazy in here, are like, hey, let's change and reframe the language. Let's not use the word, are those people, or, and the people will actually talk, even while they're talking to me as a psychiatrist, they'll run down that entire community. So, well, let's reframe that whole thing. So I think it was very brave and courageous for you to say crazy when you're absolutely trying to say, I'm an authority, I'm a psychiatrist, and I want to talk about this. I think using the vernacular is a very connective opportunity for people to really get into it because it has such a paradoxical ring to it.
in some ways, I think it's like a black person using the N-word. I come from crazy, so I can use crazy.
Yeah, right.
My people are crazy, so it's okay. I use it with sure, a sense of irony, but also a sense of pride. I'm of those people. I am those people, and I also understand them from the inside out. I think above all else, what I understand is that you're not crazy through and through. There's only a part of you that's crazy, and there's another part of you that's gifted. And that's what most people don't understand, that there is so much giftedness to be found in people who are, in one part of their mind, deranged, but another part of their mind, they're inventing amazing stuff. So, when it comes to the mind, nobody is entirely any one thing. People who suffer from depression, first of all, they're not depressed all the time. And second of all, our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, suffered from major depression. So we forget when we make these sweeping diagnoses that really our most talented and gifted people, more often than not, have one or another of the conditions we diagnose in psychiatry.
I think we need to just underline that whole couple of sentences right there, Ned, because I'm very much on the same path with you, because that's one of the things that I harp about on a regular basis regarding the current diagnostic strategy system, which is so reductionistic.
Yeah.
And what happens is it winds up being a label. And anytime somebody says, well, what's my diagnosis? I say, I'm going to give you about 20% of your diagnosis. I'm not going to give you 100%. So I'm talking percentages all the time.
Right. That's a good way.
And they come back and they say, no, Parker, it's not 20. That's about 50%. I'm like, well, but you have these coping strategies. We go back and forth. But I think to have professionals disabuse the person of that right in the sense, I think it's so profound that you say that, and any of the listeners who are patients themselves, but I think even the professionals, we need to form the habit of just doing that regularly, because then it connects us with each other as human beings, and we're not being so, reductionistic. I hate to say the word again, but we're not making it so simplistic. It is a complexity of issues that we're dealing with.
I think most of the conditions we diagnosed are markers of talent. When I hear that someone has bipolar disorder or major depression or an anxiety disorder or ADHD or dyslexia, I immediately think, boy, I'll bet they're talented. I also say they've got something to wrestle with. I'm not one of these romantics who say, oh, that's a wonderful thing to have. It's an awful thing to have. Anyone who's gone through a depression knows it's a horrible, horrible condition to go through. Or if you're in a manic phase, your life is in danger. So no, it's all not in any way something you want to have when you're in the throes of the bad part of it. But these people also, it's markers of talent. I have ADHD and dyslexia, and I wouldn't trade them for the world, because they also come with the gifts that I've got. And the same thing, by the way, for addiction, which is our most scorned and despised group. The people who have addiction, by and large, are incredibly talented, and we just need to help them give up whatever thing they're using, and then when they're able to achieve sobriety, they're able to do amazing stuff.
So very true. I think it's really a very excellent point. Listeners, I did read a little more about Ned before we got started, and I thought an interesting thing that all of you would be interested in, on a more specific point, is that Dr. Hallowell thought of becoming a psychiatrist, get this, folks, at 11 years old. Now, I'm a little older than you, Ned, I have to confess. So, I'm an old man compared to you, nothing personal. And I know when I was a kid, nobody even knew what a psychiatrist was. I had the handicap of being from Missouri, so that was even worse. But the bottom line there is, how could anybody even think about knowing what a psychiatrist was? I didn't think about it until much later after I read Freud. I got interested in Freud in my senior year.
But of course, you didn't have a psychotic father either.
No, I didn't. But I can tell you, I had my own problems. I'm not going to go into them right here because not germane to the point. But the issue is, I think we all have our problems, and we start wondering, what the heck is going on here? You're a deep guy. I'm a deep guy. And we're trying to put some packages together to understand where we're actually going to go in this lifetime. And that's what you're saying. You're saying it in one way or another. But back to it, I want to ask you the question. how in the heck, it's almost like a kind of spiritual thing for you to draw back enough to say, I want to be a psychiatrist at 11 years old. Do you have any idea how that happened?
Well, no, in the book, I relate the story. I had an auditory hallucination. A voice came into my head and said, you should be a psychiatrist. And it was the strangest thing in the world. I was standing over a lake, about to go swimming, waiting for my cousins to come out. And this voice out of nowhere said, you should be a psychiatrist. I barely knew what the word psychiatrist meant. And I sort of heard it. And I did what I guess most kids would do. I sort of said, oh, and I went swimming. I didn't make anything more of it. I mean, I more or less forgot about it, but obviously I didn't entirely forget about it because here I am today, you know.
Well, you went to private school at 10 years old.
Yeah. Yep.
So were you in private school when that happened, or were you home from private school?
It was during the summer, so it was during summer break.
I got you. That's wild. So which school did you go to, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, for the 5th to the 8th grade, I went to a school called Fessenden, which is a junior boarding school outside of Boston. And then I went to a prep school called Exeter, which is a prep school up in New Hampshire, and then Harvard.
Fantastic. I didn't know you went to Exeter.
Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter went to Exeter.
Did she really?
Yeah.
Wow. Did she like it?
I went to Culver Military Academy. That's a whole nother story.
Did she like Exeter?
She loved it. Yeah, it was a great experience.
It's a wonderful school.
You know, one of her buddies from Exeter is now the lead singer in Old Crow Medicine Show. I mean, Exeter turned some really interesting talent out. It was a lot of fun because we got to know.
What year did she graduate?
That's a good question. She is just at 40 years old. So you can do the math on it. But
so she might have had some of the same teachers I did then. So I was 68. So she was probably in the early 80s.
Yeah. In that range, yeah.
I wonder if she had Fred Tremolo. Does that name ring a bell?
I don't know. I know that she rode crew. Yeah. She went down to the boathouse on a regular basis. They won nationals.
Yeah. They were always strong. Charlie Swift was the legendary crew coach.
Yeah, and she had a very good experience there. Went on to row at University of Virginia. But it was a very good tour for her. We really appreciated it. She was trying to decide between Exeter and Choate. Oh,
I'm glad you chose Exeter. Much better choice. That school changed my life forever. It's just a remarkable place in terms of setting your mind on fire. Just really...
Yeah. Well, the way they teach. The whole idea of sitting down and actually having a conversation and teaching.
At a round table, exactly.
Yeah, that was
brilliant. You learn by the Socratic method, not by memorizing.
So then back to it. Let me ask you this question. So when you were coming along and you were having these different issues, you must have felt, I'm just projecting a little bit. Did you then feel better about actually leaving the home and the way the home was going? It was.
My God, I was thrilled. I mean,
yeah, okay.
I was. Some kids would be homesick, and I was thrilled. I was getting out of a horrible place where there was drunk and abuse, and I mean, believe me, they were decent, good people. But alcohol can do terrible things, and it was not good for a little boy to see what I saw. And my mother, it was hard for her, because it was just me, her, and my stepfather. My brothers were long gone. And so it was hard for her to send me away because I was kind of her lifeline. But she did, to her everlasting credit. And that saved me. I mean, if I had not been sent away, I have no doubt, but I would have gotten into terrible trouble. First of all, I might have killed my stepfather. I mean, even at age 10, I might have killed him. I really might have.
It was a thought that entered your mind.
Oh, many times. And I did pick up a poker and came at him one night and picked up a hatchet another night. So it was in the cards that I might well have done that. And back then, it wouldn't have been pretty, put it that way. I would not be sitting here talking to you right now, Charlie, if I murdered my stepfather.
Yeah, right. Ouch. Well, you wouldn't. At least you wouldn't have to do federal time, and you would because you were a kid. I mean, being so young, but that's terrible. It's just terrible to even think about. So then, what happened to your parents? Then, how did your mother actually turn out?
Well, she finally divorced him, and then she came back and lived out her life on Cape Cod and Chatham, where the rest of my family was, which I consider my hometown. And my dad, when lithium came on the scene, he turns out, he wasn't the schizophrenic person they thought he was. He spent his life teaching public school up in New Hampshire and was was one of the most beloved teachers that school ever had. And,
I love Chatham too. It's amazing you didn't get into saltwater fly fishing there.
I wish I had. I
fished saltwater off the, when you go out Chatham down the bars down the south of Chatham.
Yeah.
And it's really great because you can do sight fishing for stripers down there.
Did you do surf casting off the beach?
Yeah.
Really?
I've done surf casting, but because I do the fly rod, it's more fun in the water where you can do it in the beach if it's not too windy. But what happens with the fly rod, when you're back on the flats like that, those guys just spook right across the sand, and you can throw on their nose, and it's pretty doggone exciting, to tell you the truth.
Wow! You have to teach me that.
I'd be happy to. It'd be a good thing. What we could do, Ned? We could have a conference in Chatham.
That would be wonderful.
We could mix the whole thing up and
that would be wonderful.
Go fly fishing. I think we'd have a lot of people show up for the fly fishing.
Yes. Saltwater fly fishing. That's quite a. You usually think of fly fishing on a stream or a lake.
Yeah, well, I think what happened was I did that for all my childhood, and then we lived down here in Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
So, and there's no freshwater streams anywhere near here, so you're either going to saltwater fresh.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So that's how it happened. So back to you. So then, how did it happen that you got from Exeter to Harvard? What was that Exeter experience like that groomed you up to get you squared away for Harvard? How did all that happen?
Well, that was a natural pipeline. I mean, Exeter sent a lot of kids to Harvard, and I was a good student. This is the myth about ADD and dyslexia that you can't do well. I did very well. And, I was very focused on writing. I wrote a novel my 12th grade year. The last thing in my mind was medical school. I had no idea of becoming a doctor. I didn't hardly take any science courses at all. And so I got in early decision and was an English major. And then it sort of hit me, gee, I don't know that I can make a living being a writer.
Yeah.
And my practical side and my relatives were, thank God, were also practical. I said, you really want to try to make a living writing? That's pretty tough. And you are talented, but you're not independently wealthy. In fact, you have no money behind you. What are you going to do? So I said, well, how about if I hustle and take pre-med courses and see if I can't get into medical school, because then I'll always have a job. And they said, well, that's a good idea. So that's what I did.
Fantastic. Now, I'm going to ask you another question when we come back. I'm looking at the time and enjoying this conversation so much, the time is slipping away. But what I want to do is really take the next step into the transition of medical school to psychiatry, which I think is a big transition. And I would love it if you would share with us when we get back how that transition occurred, because, there's medicine, but then this whole other thing is going on. I mean, it's a natural place for a writer to go, but I'm looking forward to hearing your response to that question. So, folks, we'll be back in just a moment. Today, the world of mind science, psychiatry, and mental health is rapidly changing with innovative, comprehensive testing that takes both patients and practitioners into a new world of measured details with useful, understandable, and remarkably actionable plans. The key phrase here is cost-effective. Testing also introduces a key parallel word, predictability. Psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medications and or brief hospitalizations, arises directly from the complexity of measurable brain-body imbalances and impediments that explicitly interfere with medical outcomes and create costly difficulties with inadequately informed supplement and medication trials over time. Great Plains provides a leadership team of biomedical experts with advanced laboratory insights, approved nationally both by the FDA and CLIA laboratory certifications, and is available internationally for both public and medical professions. Great Plains Laboratory is the primary laboratory we've used at CoreSight for years, with excellent customer service for both patients and medical colleagues. They are on the spot. They get it every time. In addition, they provide exemplary training modules, which are webinars and conferences, in an effort to broaden practice perspectives wherever you live. Do follow up on one of these complimentary test offers today at http://greatplainslaboratory.com/CBJ. Yeah, that's Core Brain Journal CBJ. Well, welcome back, folks. Here we are talking to Dr. Ned Hallowell, author of Driven to Distraction, with his new book, Because I Came from a Crazy Family. He's telling us in great detail, the unexpected detail, about his childhood and the decisions he made and how he managed to pull it together. And the question I was asking, and look forward to hearing the answer just before we took a break here, was the transition. One would think it on the front hand, hey, he's a writer, it'd be natural to get into psychiatry. But I wonder if there were any other influences. What was the transition point that made you say, hey, this is something I really want to do the rest of my life?
Well, medical school encourages people to go into fields other than psychiatry. So I got, and I had a cousin who was an orthopedic surgeon who I liked a lot. And orthopedics is very, very appealing because you do a lot of good. And I was heading for orthopedics, and I thought, my cousin and I could work together, and I do a lot of good, and it just seemed like a natural. And then at the very last minute, I said, wait a minute, this is not my calling. And I really was meant to be a psychiatrist. So I changed, and I grew up with crazy people. I was meant to go treat them, and so when I made that decision, I knew it was the right decision. And I really never looked back. I'm in the field I was meant to be in. The big surprise came later, after residency and after all my training, when I did a fellowship in child psychiatry, and I discovered this condition that I'd never heard of in 1981 called attention deficit disorder. I'd never even heard of that. That was the big surprise. That was the thing that I had no preparation for. I had no inkling what it was. And that was the discovery that changed my life, saying, whoa, what is this?
So tell us a little bit about that, because that was a big turning point. When I did my first year in adult psychiatry, they weren't talking attention deficit disorder. That was 1969 is when I
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it was, it had been around, called minimal brain dysfunction. But and in 1981, when I learned about ADD, and it was a big aha moment, because I also realized that the medical description really only talked about the negatives. And I sort of knew that there was more to it than that. And that's the line I've been pursuing ever since, and that was the game changer for me when I simultaneously knew A, that I had it, and B, that it was much more interesting, complex, and vast than the textbooks had it. And so I really set about, along with my buddy John Ratey, learning from our patients. That they taught us the rest of the story.
Isn't
they taught
true?
Us how much more there was to it than the DSM had.
Well, you're so lucky to be hanging out with John Ratey. I mean, you two must have been a pair.
Yeah, he was my chief resident.
He's just like you are. He's so articulate. He's so thoughtful. Yeah. He's got such a warm heart, and he's completely unpretentious. I mean, like this is how it is.
Yeah.
No, you guys have done a heck of a job being together. So did you meet him in school then?
No, he was my chief resident in psychiatry. When I arrived at Mass Mental Health Center, I was a first-year resident, and he was the chief resident, and we've been together ever since.
Fantastic, unbelievable. Yeah. So then, what would you say would be the important things as we start thinking about where we're going to go? And the reason to have this conversation, there are multiple reasons. I mean, there's the personal reason for you to be talking about your history in the book and so on and so forth, but obviously there's a much larger reason, or you wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be here. And that is the influence of your thoughts, your book, your life on the changes that really need to take place in psychiatry as a whole. I mean, we're living in a very Paleolithic moment in my mind in terms of what's going on. I think we've made a lot of progress. People like you have pushed that progress forward. But I think also we're in a crossroads right now in terms of where are we going to go? What are we going to do? What would you say would be our biggest challenge looking forward in terms of how we can overcome some of the stigma that you were talking about a moment ago, some of the ways that we could actually make an impact to transform that dialogue, which is so counterproductive? Yeah,
well, I think that's the challenge is dismantling stigma. And It's one of the reasons I wrote my memoir, is to say, look, I come from a crazy family, and so does probably 50 or 60% of the country. We're a crazy country. We are filled with crazy genes, which is why we're so great, which is why we're so many entrepreneurs. So, we crazy and talent go hand in hand. And we need to blow up all the stigma, all this, all the hidden stuff that just causes problems, So I think it's really, the challenge is not facing psychiatry so much as it is facing the nation. We need to educate people, give them permission really to be real, to start talking about their own craziness, which is just wonderful. Celebrate it. And avail yourself of the help that's out there. The help is, we have so much more help in 2018 than we did even when I was in medical school. My goodness. And it's not just medication, it's there are many other, John Ratey wrote a whole book about the power of exercise, and now nootropics, the herbs, and there's just a whole slew of things. And my big one that I push is human connection. The Surgeon General said that loneliness is the single biggest medical problem in the country. Well, loneliness you cure by finding a friend, or getting a dog. So there are treatments available that for major problems. Loneliness is a huge problem. And we need to educate people to not be afraid of saying, I'm lonely. Lonely is cousin to depression, and anxiety and addiction, So loneliness is the first step toward those kind of problems. So, we need to talk about these things in terms that don't scare people and help people understand that almost every family has people who are crazy, and they're probably their most talented members, and start celebrating them and being proud of them. That's what I would love to see us do.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny because as we're coming to a close, I'm thinking about how important this conversation really is. And I think one of the things we should ask the listeners to do is anybody that has an interest in this conversation at all, in terms of the connection, this is a conversation that needs to be put out. We need to get Dr. Hallowell's message out there. And, we're naturally, what happens is Dr. Hallowell's got a little bit of social media activity. I do too. But the real issue is not social media. It's like, people in your life, listeners, who need to have a little breath of fresh air. They need to have a little bit of an idea of where can I go and what can I do and how can I take that next step. And I think a book like Dr. Hallowell's, this Because I Came from a Crazy Family, is remarkably reassuring. And I think even a conversation like two guys talking about this, both who happen to be board certified psychiatrists from somewhat different walks of life, but nevertheless on the same path. Conversations like this need to be out there, because that's the way it's going to diminish this whole thing of I'm going to have to see a psychiatrist. Let's really start thinking about spreading the word that this is not such a big deal.
No, it's a wonderful deal. It's a big deal in a wonderful way.
Yeah, that's very well said. Very, very true. So in closing, how can we get connected with you, Dr. Hallowell? What's the, let's leave a little bit of a...
Oh, I'm easy to find. I have office in just outside of Boston and Sudbury, office in Manhattan. My website is just drhallowell.com, but I'm in phone books, and my email address is drhallowell@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you anytime. And my podcast, don't forget my podcast.
I was just going to say that. That was the thing I was really talking about. I started going down that path. Yeah. I think people should get on your podcast. Everybody listening here should be over on that podcast.
Yeah, go to iTunes and sign up for Distraction.
It's easy enough. Go over to iTunes. It's easy. iTunes makes it really, really very easy to pop in there and just go to podcasts and jump on Distraction. Yeah. You're probably still in New and Noteworthy too.
I am actually, yeah.
That's a busy life over there.
Charlie, thank you for what you do. Thank you for having me.
Well, I really appreciate talking to you, Ned. Thank you so much for coming on board.
Thanks a million.
Because I want to talk to you a little bit when we get off. Okay.
Okay, take care.
All right, see you. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.